Hello everybody. My name is Ren, and thank you so much for joining me today. I'm here to talk to you about website user experiences and sort of as offshoots of that about user interfaces and user journeys on websites as well. We'll have plenty of time for questions at the end, and one of our viewers has kindly volunteered their website for a bit of a review for some do's and don'ts in a real world scenario, which will be nice. But first, if you'll indulge me quickly in talking about myself just a little bit. So I work for a digital agency called Split Pixel Creative. We're based in Huddersfield in England. This webinar specifies England because the last time I did it, there were Americans here. So it's near Leeds and Manchester for anyone who doesn't know. I think it's about there. My geography is not actually very good. The agency started out working with small startups in our town, and we've grown slowly and steadily sort of ever since. We now work with a large B2B and B2C client base, as well as a range of arts organizations and charities across the UK and even around the world. So here's just an overwhelming wall of some of the arts organizations we've worked with in just the past few years. Some you might know, some you might not. There is quite a big mix. So the content today is mostly going to be focused towards arts organizations such as these, but the principles apply, sort of across the board to user experience more generally. So Split Pixel, we started out doing just basic web design and development, and I was brought on as a copywriter about 5.5 years ago, when the agency was pivoting to offering more marketing services, mostly content marketing and SEO at first, and we were getting more requests to write on-page web copy ourselves. So since then, I've become head of content for the agency with a small content team working with me, and I'm also head of web projects across the studio, which is what qualifies me to be here talking to you today, I suppose. So why, you might be asking, did one copywriter end up finding himself in charge of all websites across an entire digital studio? Well, that's because content underpins pretty much every aspect of a website. A user interface is basically how the website presents content. A user journey is how content directs you around that website, and a user's experience can only ultimately be as good as the content that they are experiencing. So let's dig a little bit deeper into each of these three things: UX, UI, and user journey. And we'll start with the first thing people will encounter and have an opinion on, which is the user interface. So what is UI? It's a term you might hear bandied about quite a lot, but sometimes by people who know what it is and sometimes by people who don't. Essentially, it's short for user interface. Simply put, it's what things look like. And it's largely driven by a web designer, so how they use color, text, images, space. But content comes into it when we look at how these things interact with each other, how copy and images are presented on the page. And perhaps most importantly in the UI, we need to consider how the design actually lets you engage with it. So things like menus, navigations, call to action, forms, and so on, the things that you can actually use. And hopefully you can see how this, is a major part of someone's experience with the website. Is the first thing they sort of reach out and touch. So it's how you navigate around the website and how you find the things you need. And it is important to remember that while UX and UI, they're often used quite interchangeably. You might see people, conflate the two and say they're basically the same thing. The interface is just one element of the overall user experience. So while how a website looks is really important, it's just as important to remember that you have to think beyond just how it looks. So what makes actually a good UI? It's quite a tricky one because it's driven by the design, and design is highly subjective. Everyone has different tastes, everyone has different expectations. Because it's made up of so many different factors, it can be really hard to pin it down. But there are a few golden rules that we can follow. So a good UI is inviting. So while something really flashy and complicated can be impressive and exciting, it can also be quite off-putting. The first impression needs to be a good one. It really needs to be one that invites people in and makes them want to stay on the website and continue to use it. A good UI is also conventional, not in a sort of standard conservative sort of way, but more in a sort of follows general online conventions sort of way. Some people have a general understanding of how things on the web are meant to work, and there are shared elements that you'll likely see everywhere across all different kinds of websites. Things should work as people expect them to. But some people, on the other hand, don't have a clue. A UI needs to speak to both groups. So while things should work as expected, it shouldn't assume too much knowledge. It should also be consistent. once someone's learned your UI, it should follow the same rules throughout, so people don't have to learn it all over again. Consistent use of color and interaction, for example, are really important. Things that mean something in one place should mean the same thing somewhere else. And all of this stuff is basically in service of making a website accessible to everybody. Everyone has a different level of knowledge. Everyone has different physical requirements for how they physically can use a computer or a phone. It's easy to take for granted that we can browse a website with a mouse or with our hands on phones or tablets, and that we can read what's on screen. Some people can't. A lot of web accessibility work is done on the technical level, but it starts with the UI. So ensuring colors have adequate contrast for people with vision impairments, that text and labels are big enough, that the interface doesn't rely solely on certain types of content, such as audio or just purely visual content that not everyone can see. And none of this means that a website has to look bad, of course. It's possible to make really beautiful, accessible, intuitive websites that can still take a very design-forward approach, as long as you don't lose track of everything else, essentially. So it's often easiest to just put this into context and show some examples. Everybody loves Apple. People often cite the Apple site to me as an example that they aspire towards for their new website. They will say, oh, have you seen the Apple website? Of course we've seen the Apple website. But how good actually is it from a user interface and user experience perspective? I think maybe it's not so good, and it coasts and relies on the fact that it's Apple and doesn't necessarily tick all of the boxes. So for example, there's really tiny low contrast text, gray text on a gray background up at the top there. It's, you know, quite easy to miss, and it's quite hard to read on a smaller screen. Using the Apple icon instead of a more traditional home icon, it's fairly standard to do that, but you know, it might confuse some users. We have store in the nav, but also all of their products are right there at the top as well. So if I want to buy an iPad, do I go to the iPad page? Do I go to the store page? Not clear. I might have to click on a few things before I get to where I want to go. The search icon is fine, looks good, but the basket icon looks a little bit like a weird little briefcase. Is that immediately clear that that's, you know, the basket, the store area? And while this color combination down the bottom does pass accessibility standards, it checks the box that say these colors are different enough. I personally think it looks horrible having blue on a purpley color like that. You know, not particularly engaging. And also, what if I don't want an iPhone? You know, this homepage is not for me. Obviously, this is a bit nitpicky, and there's more to the website and the homepage once we scroll. But you know, just to highlight a few common examples, making the initial introduction to your website too focused on one thing, that it essentially makes people wonder whether they're in the right place and where to go next. So let's have a look at their rivals. Samsung. Samsung are probably known less for their aesthetics and perhaps more for their function. But can their website do both? The nav, bigger and clearer than Apple. Bit less ambiguous. Less common functions are separated out over to one side. Slightly more recognizable icons with the shopping trolley and the user icon for logging into your account. There's a sliding element in the header to show multiple products, and I believe that auto scrolls if I remember right. So even if the first thing you see is a specific product, fairly soon you'll be seeing other things, and you'll be given an opportunity to go and look at something else. And it moves you on to explore different products quickly with a very handy filter. Overall, I think it's a better user interface. That said, without the colorful graphics and the bold, chunky font, it might not feel as aesthetically pleasing as Apple's more stylized approach. Generally speaking, though, I think they're both pretty good examples. They're both pretty straightforward and consistent. They follow design principles that are familiar. And how accessible, inviting, and aesthetically pleasing they are is kind of more of a matter of personal taste. But that's just, you know, my opinion. Design is entirely subjective, and you might feel completely different about it, which is what makes the design stage of any web project such, you know, not difficult, but involved part of the process. It's often very iterative, and it takes a lot of work to create a user interface that sort of makes everybody happy and works for everybody. If you've got any specific questions about that, or if you have a very strong opinion about the examples that I just shared, please do drop a question in, and we can have a little chat about it later. But let's move on for now to user journeys. What are they? Basically, no prizes for figuring out that they're the journey a user takes through a website, how they scroll through each page and navigate to the next. Every user will have a different journey through the site depending on their individual goal and just on how they happen to click around things. Certain aspects of the user journey are completely unpredictable. But the goal is key. A user will want to do a specific thing on your site, whether that's booking a ticket, buying a product, sending you an inquiry, or just finding out some information. There's also probably certain things that you, as an organization, would prefer them to do. So gently encouraging them to take the journey you want without frustrating their own plans to the point that they leave is a really delicate balance. And content is essential for this. You need to give people enough information to confidently take the next step in their user journey and move towards the goal that you want them to take. And it's not always a straight line. Everyone will enter the user journey at a different point, depending on what they've searched for or what link a friend might have sent them or where they've seen you on social or something like that. People might leave and come back later after researching you somewhere else, you know, or they might go and look at your social after seeing the website and come back. But the UI of a website should really be in service of the user journey. So an absolutely wild design might be great at drawing people in initially, but where do they go next? The site's design and layout should help them make decisions about where to go next, guiding them along the journey that you want them to take. And the user journey is arguably the biggest impact on a site's user experience. At the end of the day, someone's experience will boil down to whether they could do what they wanted to do and find what they wanted to find or not. And so what makes a good journey and what makes a bad one? I think it is a little less subjective than design. So I feel a little bit more confident in setting it out a little bit more clearly. A good journey understands its users and what they'll want to get out of a website. A bad one assumes too much or tries too hard to push users towards a conclusion that they may not necessarily be interested in. A good one understands that people will land on a variety of different pages and come to the site from a variety of sources and a variety of lead temperatures, both hot and cold. It ensures key information and context about the organization is within reach at all times. Whereas, a bad one assumes that everyone will land on the homepage and makes it a challenge to begin a journey on a deeper page. So all of the context is on the homepage, and as soon as you're away from the homepage, it's really hard to learn about the wider organization and who you are and what you're doing. A good user journey always has a clear next step, whether it's a call to action, a contact form, or just another page to go to and explore. A good user journey will keep a user moving and interacting. They shouldn't have to use the back button in their browser or wonder where they're going next. Whereas a bad one, on the other hand, hits brick walls, it hits dead ends. When a page's main content is finished, the page might just stop without thinking about what it wants a user to do next. A good user journey when new pages are added to the website or when a new website is created. The menu structure is planned out to ensure that people have clear routes to goals in just a short number of clicks, and that the URL structure is organized enough that users can navigate by a breadcrumb or a URL bar. Pages are signposted clearly from multiple places at relevant times as well. And all of this doesn't just help users navigate, it helps Google crawl the site efficiently, find all your pages, and better serve them to search engine users. A bad user journey, on the other hand, doesn't really consider structure. Pages aren't added into a proper hierarchy. They aren't signposted from helpful places. They're just thrown onto the website. A link might be tossed onto the homepage because it's the most important thing at the moment. And that's it. That's the only way to get to it. I forgot to take this question out. Any suggestions from the audience? What do you think makes a site easy to navigate in your experience, and what makes a user journey difficult? I would be keen to hear from you at the end if you have any thoughts. So let's look at how we can plan a user journey. The best way to do it is to break your website's users down into a few broad groups or user personas. It's a fairly classic marketing tactic, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It considers who typical groups are. They can be hyper-specific or fairly broad. I find the most useful ones tend to be somewhere in between. Sketching out who a user is, where they are in life, how they relate to the organization, what they want out of you, and then you make sure user journeys are available on the website that help them meet those goals. So here's an example of one that we've created for a theatre in Leeds. It focuses on locals who love going out and experiencing cultural events. So first we ask ourselves who they are, why they like or might like the theatre, what barriers there might be to engaging with them. I'm sure a person like this will sound very familiar to a lot of you. Next, we look at what we want them to do, their goals on the site, the specific activities we want them to undertake. We consider what questions this kind of user might ask specifically, consider how the website might help them answer those questions. And we also think about potential issues that could arise and try to do a bit of forward planning as to how we might avoid them. So if we take a bit of a look closer, so this user, We've determined the local events enthusiast, they're late 20s at youngest, early mid 30s. The commuterland cultural buff, to use the jargony term from the audience research agency that I can't remember the name of off the top of my head, sorry. But this group lives in areas such as Chapelhallerton or Meanwood, which are posh leaning suburbs of Leeds. They may have young children, typically work standard 9 to 5, increasingly from home. Money's far from tight, but they're careful with it. So why do they like this theatre? They've not fully outgrown gig and club nights, but these are coming a bit rarer. They want something contemporary, exciting, different. They're also a bit more grown up. They're more interested in sit-down music, musical or comedy shows, and they have the beginning of an interest in theatre. They also have an eye on family or education events for their kids in the future. And the barriers to their engagement might be too much of a focus on activities for young people, making it look like too much of a child-centric venue, or too much focus on seniors, on the other hand, might leave them wondering whether this is the right space for them culturally right now. This group also increasingly diverse in gender, sexual orientation, race, class. Do they see themselves reflected in the website? Do they see themselves reflected in the program? So when we break it down, what are the two main goals of a user like this? Primarily, they want to learn more about events. Secondary, they want to learn more about the theatre as an organisation. So we then break down the activities that they'll do on site to do both of these things. So to learn more about the events, they're going to be doing some research into what's coming up, how they get there. They're going to be booking. They need to know how much events cost. Is there anything that's free? Do they need to book in advance? How do they do that? And they might also be planning for the future. So what can they do in the next few months? What can they do with their kids in the next couple of years? When they're looking to learn more about the organization, they're going to be researching whether this organization represents them and their family. Is it right for them? They might be interested in donating. How can they support the theatre? Where does their money go? And also, how can they get involved? What can they bring to the organization themselves? How can they volunteer? How can they apply to volunteer? So then we look at what we can do to answer these questions and help that user meet those goals. So what's coming up? Obviously, you need accessible event listings directly from the homepage to make the venue feel vibrant and active. Clear information, integrated Google Maps, parking information. That's how people get there. For booking, show prices up front on event listings. If there are free events, break them down into their own categories. Include clear information on each event. Use FAQ sections to provide advice, show clear contact info for booking, have a calendar that's populated well in advance, offer newsletter sign-up CTAs within reach at all times on all pages, have clear navigation to family and youth in the menu, use careful use of the youth and family categories so as not to overpower the other options, thinking about that barrier from before. And then when it comes to researching, make sure there's clear mission statements, make sure it's clear what the organization stands for through the content. Use diverse imagery, use event categories based on interest and identity, have clear donation options throughout the website at key points in the user journey, have well-rounded support sections with imagery of the projects in action so we can see where their money is going. When it comes to getting involved, clearly list volunteer roles, pair them with open calls for people to get in touch to discuss how they can help. Have inquiry forms integrated directly into the site so people don't have to download a form and fill it out and send it in because they'll forget they need to do that 20 minutes later. And then we also look at what potential pain points there might be that, again, will create further barriers to people doing these things. So things like overwhelming options that aren't easy to filter, too many nested menus with information hidden away, inconsistent messaging on booking fees, lack of trust in external booking links if people are taken elsewhere to go and pay. Lack of care around GDPR is going to annoy people if, asking them to sign up for emails. Lack of clarity on plans for the future. Our class is long-term, short-term, that sort of thing. Is imagery that you're sharing like authentic? Is it recognizably from the theatre itself rather than stock image? Is there confusion between different funds? Is information hidden away? Are listings outdated? Is there too much screaming at you at all times, essentially? So this is how we sort of start to break down. And typically we would do this for maybe 3 or 4 broad user groups. The sky's the limit depending on how many user personas you identify yourself. But this is how we sort of start to feed this into elements of the user interface, and how the user experience overall needs to work to deliver this user journey, and what content we're going to need to create this user journey. So UX, that brings us to the UX. Generally speaking, you could view it as a simple equation of a user interface plus the user journey equals user experience. And you probably wouldn't be too far off if you looked at it that way. You could probably add in multiplied by the content if you wanted to. But essentially, it's how all these different things, the look, the colors, the accessibility, the words, pictures, menus, CTAs, signposts, it's how they interact to create the overall vibe of the site. And there is actually a bit of a vibe to it. You can tell a good user experience pretty much immediately. You know, you get to a site and you know whether it's going to be easy to use or whether it's going to be difficult to use. It's just, it hits you in the face straight away. And if you've considered user journeys and created a great interface to facilitate them properly, you are most of the way there. But the more complicated a site is, and arts organization sites in particular, or anyone who's selling things, are often a bit more complicated than your standard website, the more finer points you need to consider. So let's have a little look at some examples. The venues have a lot going on and a lot of different user personas wanting different things. So this is a key area where the UI, the user interface and the user journey interact, presenting a lot of information and options that let people find their specific destination and presenting it in a way that's easy to use. So, you know, we do this with, for example, presenting people with drop-down searches that can combine to come up with highly specific results. It lets someone plan their own user journey, essentially, rather than just having to scroll through endless events to find the things that work for them. Natural language used like what's on today, you know, helps people instantly understand what's going on. The hover state colors you can see there over the stand-up, that's been hovered over. It helps people interact with ease, know what they're clicking on straight away. If you want to address a specific need, like helping people find accessible events, you can create separate, more targeted user journeys for specific needs that present certain content in a way that's even easier to digest. So this is something that we did for a theatre who integrate with Spectrix. We gave them tags in the back end of Spectrix, obviously to tag whether an event has sign language, audio descriptions, closed captioning, and any event that, any instance of any event, so not the event as a whole, but the specific performance of that event that is tagged with an accessibility icon is pulled into an event that event list, sorry, that is even easier to navigate than the usual user listing. So it's very easy to use on a screen reader, keyboard, any way that you want to navigate through this. It's a lot more straightforward, and it pulls everything together all in one go. So you know that the things within this listing are tailored for you. You don't have to do any additional work essentially to find things that are right for you. Or, you know, where you have a more divided set of user personas, you can signpost users really explicitly, help narrow the filters down for them. So this is an example of a venue in London. They have all kinds of wild circus performances, theatre performances, comedy, music, all that sort of thing. But also a very, very important part of their program is the classes, courses. They are like a circus, they specialize in circus. So as well as performance, they have circus skills, workshops and things like that. So rather than jumbling all of that together in one big listing, we wanted to make it really clear, you know, that you could go find out things that you can do and things that you can watch essentially. And that came out of that user journey planning, understanding that the users are, these user personas, while not completely disparate, are separate enough that when they come to the website, their intent tends to be for one thing rather than the other. So making that journey more easy is an essential part of making sure the experience works for that user at that given time. So the most important element of websites such as this, where users are probably most likely to give up, but also the most complicated to get right, depending on the box office software you use, is the ticket booking. So make sure it's as easy to find as possible in reach with minimal clicking and scrolling. So for example, on this one, you've got 2 buttons on every event in the listing. Take a look takes you to the event description. Book tickets takes you directly to the purchasing element. We found that this is something that people do actually use because people might have come and explored the event, thought, yeah, I want to go to that, but I need to check if my friends are free or if we can get a babysitter or something like that. When they come back, they just want to click straight on book tickets and get straight there. So that's a really important thing to consider, that the user experience needs of a user will change over time and people will come back and revisit, and you need to offer options that accommodate that as much as possible. Or, you know, you could offer more information up front, as well as providing ticket level info a little bit more prominently. So this website, for example, takes a bit more of a cinema style approach, shows the listing times and costs directly on the listing page. Also has box office levels, so if something's sold out, you need to call the box office. It makes you aware of that before you even click through, removing some frustration and abandoned carts for your analytics tracking and that sort of thing. And in the ticket booking process, you can also add additional upsells to the natural user journey to make it easier for the user to find everything they need, even if they don't necessarily know that they need it, while ensuring that your own goals are met. So, for example, you can introduce donations while people are paying for tickets. It's at a time when they are already, they've already decided to give your organization money, and see if they're willing to give a little more. You can also integrate things like car parking vouchers, programs, before show drinks, all of that sort of thing. Bring that sort of stuff into the natural user booking journey. Don't make them go and look for it elsewhere. You can also add autocomplete tools to save users time when it comes to booking. So Find My Address makes it much easier. Very important for collecting payments and ensuring identities on tickets and that sort of thing. Basically take that burden off the user as much as possible. Use clear and trusted payment tools to let people buy in confidence. So, if it's PayPal, tell people it's PayPal. Some people don't like PayPal. Some people prefer to put their card details in. Often it's best to offer as many options as you can for payment, but also that does mean you have to pay for multiple payment gateways. So it's just something to consider how you can best serve all of those users. Another key part of website user experience and things you might want out of your website is lead generation. So encouraging people to part with their personal details is always going to be a bit of a challenge. So make sure there's a few barriers as possible to doing so. For example, on this website for a little music festival down on the South Coast, we incorporated a newsletter sign up into the main mega menu that you get when you click the top right menu. So it's baked into the user journey at every stage. The social media links are readily there to capture people a different way if that's what that user would prefer. Give people direct contact routes to make them feel encouraged their inquiry will be handled by the right person without opening up your team to spam by posting their email address or phone number all over the site. Create forms that direct inquiries to different departments based on what people have selected. Use staged forms directly through the site to remove the barrier of someone needing to email complex information separately. Let them do it now. If they have to do it later, they may forget. So let people upload their CV directly through the website and send it to you, rather than having to go away and do something separately. Donations, very important. Keep them prominent and in reach at all times. Make them flexible. Ensure users are given plenty of context on why they should support you. So on this website, for example, the Exeter Northcote Theatre, there is a big yellow screaming support us button that when you click pops out a little section where you can choose your donation options and add them directly to your basket. Or you can learn a little bit more context about why you might donate. When you get to that donate page, those donation options are there again. So the donation is always within reach. And make it easy for people to support you with plenty of options that suit different users. So offer installments if your booking software will allow you to. Make sure that there are options for people to auto-renew so you don't get those drop-offs. Essentially, make things easy for your users while they're on site. But what about when they're off site? And I think we'll probably take a couple of minutes just for a break there, and we'll come back in a little bit and look at some off-site user experience things we can do before diving into a little bit of a website review and some questions. So see you all in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, right. Perfect time. I was like, when do you interrupt someone? It's really awkward. So yeah, no, perfect timing. Well done. I haven't got a break screen, so if you wouldn't mind leaving that blank screen there, that'd be very. I was going to draw like using the whiteboard, but I chose not to in the end. So it's 10:31. Should we come back at what 10:34? 3 minutes.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Cool. Okay,
That's okay with everybody. See you all in a few minutes. Hi everyone. Are we ready to get started again?
Yeah, we've still got 37 participants here, all chatting away nicely. If you haven't done so already, and if you have a question, pop it in the question, the Q&A part. We've got a few already, but we'll get to those at the end. But they all great questions. So if you've got any that you want to add to that, then please do so. But yeah, I think we're good to get started again.
Okay. Yeah. So we've already had a look at on-site user experience, and I finished just a moment ago by saying, what about when things are off-site? So there are extra things you can do to consider the user experience for users when they're not actually with you, and that starts with how they find you, essentially. Obviously, Google runs our lives more than we care to admit, and it forms part of the user experience too. I already have briefly mentioned where people start their user journeys, and this kind of links back to that. Creating site content that will help people find a specific area of your site before they're even on it will go a long way to ensuring the user journey is focused and their user experience is a good one. If you think about it, when you Google, when you search for something, you might use Bing, you might use Yahoo Search, I don't know, I shouldn't assume Google, but when you search for something and you have options that include the homepage or a specific page for, the thing that you've searched for, which are you more likely to go for? It's probably more likely that you will click on the specific, item that is more targeted to your search query. So that, if you create those pages and optimize them in a way that they will appear for those search queries, it means that you are basically giving that user a head start on their user journey, getting them closer to the goal that you want them to meet. And the site itself has to do a little bit less heavy lifting for it. So one of the ways that you can do this is using descriptive metadata, which will help people get a sense of what they're clicking on before they click it. Essentially, it's starting their experience of the site before you get to it. So Mercury Theatre, this was the one that I showed you the accessible listing for a little bit earlier. They run a lot of youth theatre pages, youth theatre services in Colchester. So when you search for youth theatre in Colchester, you get a couple of different results on the same website. So you might get to the theatre programs for young people, or you might get to their specific Mercury Young Company page, different things. You might have heard of the Young Company and want to go directly to that. You might know a little bit less about theatre, like what they offer for young people. So you might want to head for that. But you'll see that the metadata has been written to include those, search-worthy phrases. For example, it highlights young people, it highlights theatre. These pages have been optimized to appear for youth theatre and make sure that when people are searching for youth theatre, they are finding these key areas of the website rather than just landing on the homepage and having to find these areas themselves through the site's user journey. You can also make sure your other marketing channels match your website. So print brochures, social media, emails, they should all follow your brand guidelines, obviously. And they should all include routes to the website wherever possible, and sort of vice versa. These things should be easily within reach from different areas of your website, whether that's social media feeds, links, more straightforward links just to social media, ways to download the brochure through PDF, ways to sign up for the newsletter, all that sort of thing. It should all be one big connected marketing ecosystem across digital and print and everything that allows users to find their way to the website in a variety of ways, because essentially at the end of the day, the website is where the bookings happen, the website is where the money is made. So the main goal should be to push people through to that website to achieve the goals that you have for them there. So that's a very, very quick look at sort of off-site things you can do. Outside of organic search, there's paid search options as well, where you can run ads essentially that point people towards specific pages that you want people to go to. But that's a much wider conversation potentially for another day, getting into the paid side of things. So without much further ado, it's website review time. So big thank you for Mark at Theatre Nation for volunteering to let us take a look. And we'll do some questions after this essentially. So if you want any questions answered, now's your time to get them into the Q&A. So just bear with me 1 second while I reshare my screen for the Theatre Nation website. Now, a few people volunteered to have their website picked apart and criticized by me, which was very, very generous. But I chose Theatre Nation because there was a lot I liked about it. I think it's a really good site with a couple of common, like, sort of not flaws, but things that you see quite frequently that I would potentially recommend against. And Mark did have a couple of specific questions as well. So interestingly, the homepage has changed since Mark originally sent the website over. They are now presenting their big new Waiting for Godot show at the 3 specific venues, which I like quite a lot, actually. Generally, you call this a homepage takeover, where you dedicate your entire homepage to a specific thing. And they can be very good for achieving specific goals in the short term. And you do have the sort of the menu still within reach at the top here, so it's not lost altogether. But one thing I potentially would recommend when doing something like this is still maintain a few key signposts, information, CTAs at the bottom of the homepage to give a little bit more context to people who don't necessarily want to go straight for this booking and want to learn a little bit more about Theatre Nation as a whole. But like I say, you've got the menu within reach at the top, and that's very good. So these sites take you to external pages, and they open the pages in new tabs, which is very good. It's very important that when people are leaving your website, you also keep them on yours at the same time. And we've got social media links at the bottom that do the same. So that's working. That's great. One thing, the nav is quite clear, but I'm not 100% sure on the font. I wonder if some people might find it hard to read. And one thing I'm going to do as well is just turn on a tool called Wave Evaluation Tool, which tells you accessibility-based issues with a website. So it's flagging up an error for these buttons. What's it saying? Very low contrast. So yeah, actually, according to AA, accessibility guidelines, the pink on the gray is actually not an accessible color contrast. So some people may struggle to read those labels in the color contrast they are. This is a tool just called Wave. It's a Google Chrome plugin. You can install it and run a really, really simple, quick audit on your website with very little fuss. The one error is something is missing alternative text, but I can't quite see where that is, so it's not foolproof. Lots of alerts, images with title. The title I think that means that the title is not necessarily particularly descriptive of what the image is, and you've got various features that don't have alternative text in there, so they may be difficult for users who are using like screen readers to interact with those elements exactly. But the main issue I would say is probably that the colors in this really nice font are maybe a little bit inaccessible, so the contrast of that could be raised a little bit. One other thing, I like the simple twist around animation that doesn't impact usability at all, and is a really nice way to add some extra flavor to the website. One other thing, when you scroll down here, where was it? This is another thing for the contrast and accessibility. There's nothing necessarily wrong with having text over images and text over video, as long as like the contrast is good enough that you can read. And I think, let's have a quick check. Yep, it doesn't flag that contrast is any issue. But the one thing I would potentially say is the blinking lights behind it might potentially be off-putting, distracting to some people. So it's kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about inviting. This at first glance, this seems lovely and inviting and twinkly and nice, but for some people it could put them off. So that's always something to consider. Up here, it's a little bit more static, using this like transparent background to make the text stand out a little bit more against the background could go a long way to helping that sort of thing. As we scroll down, we can link through to the past projects, which is the same thing as the menu up there, which is quite nice. So if we go to the very risque sounding polyamory, this is quite a nice page. It has quite a lot of information, quite a lot of context. You can pop out images and learn more about it. The only criticism I have here is an issue you see quite widely across a lot of different websites. These images, this text here, sorry, even is an image. So it's not actually HTML content on the website that can be read by screen readers or even by Google. So if there are keywords in this text, Google does not know that they are there. One thing you can do when you add images like this that have a lot of context in them is you can add what's called an alt tag, and you can usually do that through most content management systems allow you, when you upload an image, to add an alt tag to them. You might also have seen on Twitter, Instagram, things like that, they've introduced alt text now, so you can put a description of an image that people can click. I think on Instagram, you know, people do like image captions in the description, all that sort of thing, to make things more accessible. But I believe if I inspect this element, I don't know if you can see the DevTools window that I've popped up, but you can see that there's no name set on this image. And if you see the DevTools, there's no alt text set on this image. So what I would do for this would be to write some alt text that describes the content that is in this image. And that means that Google knows what's in this image. That means that users who are relying on screen readers to read things out to them know what's in that image. But that doesn't necessarily have to just be for images with text in them. Any image at all. It's good for search. It's good for accessibility if you add those alt tags, essentially. So when we go to the contact page, again, you've got your blinking lights behind the screen, which might be distracting for some people. And as we discussed before, you could potentially improve inquiries by having like a form embedded directly on the page, which allows people to send messages directly rather than having to go elsewhere and send an email. The jury's out potentially on contact forms. Some people prefer to use them, some people don't. But I suppose the thing is giving people the option to send directly through a contact form or email a specific person they want to email is always a very nice way to approach things. It's all about giving users choice to do what they want to do, to use the website in a way that lets them achieve their goals rather than hindering them. So yeah, essentially overall, I do like the Theatre Nation website, even though I've said some critical things of it. I think there's a lot that it does quite nicely for such a small site, but there are just a few areas where I would potentially recommend tightening it up, such as including some more user journey elements on the home page, having a look at the contrast of the brand colors at the top there, either a darker header strip or a lighter color would work. I think the yellow, for example, passes accessibility guidelines, but the pink doesn't. I'm not sure if the red would, just looking at it, but that's just something to consider. So yeah, loads a little bit slowly. This, for example, this is better than the other one. It has the content set out in HTML, plenty of videos. Oh, there we go. We get here into the image rather than HTML content. It's a tricky one essentially, because sometimes you do just want to present something in an image, but even if you don't want to type out all of this content, you could set an alt tag that describes that this is a newspaper review of the performance, essentially. So users who are using it in that way aren't missing out on something, essentially. You could you could use the alt text to include some brief context about the review. You could say it's a review of the Three Love Muses by, oh no, sorry, it's a review of Paris Snow by Kent Barker for, I don't know what publication this is for, and you could include like a really brief summary of what's in there, essentially. So that is a very quick look at a website. Mark did have a couple of additional questions for me, so I am just going to share my screen and answer Mark's questions. So the questions Mark had were how to maximize content to increase reach and impact of Google Ad grants. So that Waiting for Godot production goes to Hastings, Brighton and Tunbridge Wells. In the past, they've had a single web page that covers the production and dates, but now they have 3 separate pages with common elements: the prayer, the director and the task, with 3 location variants. So I think the question that Mark is asking is, Google Ad grants is when Google essentially gives you free money, if you're a charity, to run paid ads through Google. And Google Ads work a little bit different to organic SEO, because you can guide people to wherever you want. There's no sort of guesswork involved about what page is going to rank. You can say, I want users that search for this term to see this advert, click on that advert and go to that page. So there's nothing wrong with having 3 practically identical Google ad landing pages that appear for different search terms and have slightly different context on them. So because when you're doing Google ad landing pages, the best thing to do is to no index them and hide the results from Google. So when you search, they don't appear in organic search, they only appear in those sponsored paid ad searches. So it doesn't matter if you have duplicated content. You can have specific pages, if you search for, Waiting for Godot Brighton, you get to the Brighton page, which has information about the Brighton venue and the Brighton booking. If you search for the Hastings one, it does the same. There's nothing wrong with doing that. So if you wanted to maximize your conversions that way, it would probably be best to have 3 separate pages in that way for each of those 3 that we saw on the homepage, targeting those ads specifically at those areas, at users based near those locations, to make sure that they're getting the most relevant content for them and optimizing those conversions that way. Hopefully that answers the question that Mark sent over when he submitted his website to us. So thanks so much for that, Mark. I really appreciate you getting involved. So there we have it. Hopefully this has served as a very helpful, if quite quick, overview and sparked some inspiration. So at this point, I would love to answer any questions that you've been sending through in the chat. So Dean, over to you. What have you got for me?
Right, I think I've got 11 questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah, so
that's fine.
First one is, do you have any tips for picking the best language to use in the navigations of your website, i.e. if you want to move away from the standard home, about, or what's on, etc., but still need to make sure your audience can find what they need?
That is a good question. One thing to say straight away is that you can have different, in most like CMS systems, and most web developers will be able to do this for you, is you can have labels in your navigation that are different to the name of the page. So if you've optimized, a page for a certain search term, you don't necessarily have to have that exact same term in your menu bar, so you can tailor the journey of your nav a little bit more clearly. I don't think there's a best way to do it, or a right or wrong way to do it. I think the thing is what feels most right for your organization, what fits most with the way that you talk about yourselves. So rather than about, a lot of venues use like our story, that sort of thing, because they're telling, they are telling you a story about their history, about their heritage, about that sort of thing. If you're a slightly newer venue, you've maybe got less of a story to tell at the moment. People do want to know, actually, who are these guys? About us is more simple there. For things like what's on, as we saw earlier, that you can actually break it down into individual genres. So you could have, shows and events, or coming up, or something like that.
Yeah.
There's no best way to do it. It really comes down to your tone of voice and your language. And there's nothing wrong with trialing things. There is various pieces of software. One we use is called Crazy Egg. There's another called Hotjar, which are heat map tracking pieces of software. And what they do is they track where people are clicking and scrolling to on your website. So you could use software like that to see if people are more likely to click on labels when they're called different things. There's nothing wrong with swapping around, testing what works and changing. You should really see like your user journey as something that's constantly evolving and reacting to information that you get back from users.
Brilliant, excellent. Cool, next question. What is the best font size to use? I find some websites are way too small. That goes back to accessibility, I guess.
Yeah, I think so. Font size is an interesting one. A lot of things with accessibility generally is if people have a specific accessibility need, often they will have a tool in their browser that meets that need for them. So the important thing for our developers, for example, when they're building an accessible website, is to build it in a way that allows those tools to affect what happens on the website. So again, yeah, there's no straight answer for the best font size. It depends on the font, obviously, because different fonts are larger or smaller. A 12-point font of one font could be larger or smaller than another. Generally speaking, yes, I agree. A lot of websites do go a little bit small. Contrast is probably more important than size. Like grey text on a white background, even if it's a dark grey, is going to be harder to read if it's larger than black text on a white background at a smaller size. But yeah, so yeah, I don't really have a straight answer for that one, but generally, I think people can generally go a bit bigger than what they do. I do agree.
And the app that you showed us a little while ago, would that help to sort of inform them on that decision, to sort of like highlight what is potentially has problems with accessibility?
Yeah, I don't think Wave would specifically look at font size, but it would look at contrast at different sizes, because what it does judge, AA accessibility rules, there's an algorithm behind them. Some contrasts are deemed to pass accessibility when they're large compared to when they're small. So when we looked at Theatre Nation, that pink over the grey, that was quite small. If that was bigger, that might actually pass accessibility. You know, so it's more about the contrast between the text and the screen more than the size itself.
Cool, right. What are your thoughts on using pop-ups for signups?
I hate them, but they do get results.
Do they?
Essentially, they do get results. The jury's out on whether they turn people off as well. My thoughts are I would tend to avoid them. But if you're finding that you're not getting any signups, there is nothing wrong with trialing one and seeing if it does work. With most things, there's a lot of trial and error in user experience, in seeing how people interact with things and making decisions based on the data that you get out of it. So if you have a web agency or a developer that makes it very difficult for you to make changes to your website and do things on an ad hoc, iterative basis, please don't interpret this as a sales pitch in the slightest, but I would encourage you to look for one that's more responsive and can actually help you make those changes on a day-to-day basis, because it's really important that you can use your website as an active tool, essentially. So yeah, give pop-ups a go. They might work, they might not. That's the best I can tell you.
No, it's A and B testing, isn't it? Give it a go. Hotjar will help you sort of see whether people are sort of sticking around or moving on.
Yeah, and that is a good point. You can A/B test. There are tools. I think Google Optimize lets you do it quite straightforwardly. There are various other A/B tools out there as well. Developers can do A/B testing when they serve to some users but not others. So yeah, use a pop-up for half your users. See if you get more signups from that half than the other half. That would be a really great way to test that out.
Cool. Right, Lindsay has asked, is there an ideal number of items for the horizontal navigational bar?
No, I would say no. Our designers tend to try and keep them as minimal as possible. The thing you've got to bear in mind is responsive design. So everyone uses different size screens now. On mobile, you're not really going to even see that horizontal bar. It's going to be in a, probably in a hamburger pop-out nav, and I assume many of you will have the majority of your traffic on mobile anyway. That's something to consider. The screen changes size. As the screen changes size, you can change the size of your screen, and that's obviously going to give you more or less space to have those items in the top nav. So if you keep it minimal, all of them will show for longer the smaller you get. There's no magic number. It's essentially comes down to how big how much space your logo takes up, how much space your basket takes up, how big or small the font size is for how much you can fit in. And I would always test it on a smaller laptop. Yeah. Because one thing our designers are guilty of is they have bloody massive screen that they do all the designs on, and forget that we have to remind them sometimes that, guys, this doesn't quite work on our laptop. You need to fix your responsive breakdowns.
Totally, yeah. Becky asks, what tools can you use to get people to your end goal, e.g. watching on-demand videos? So I'm going to repeat that because I read it like a 4-year-old. What tools can you use to get people to your end goal? So obviously in their case, they want to get them to watch an on-demand video. How do you do that? Do you do like a homepage takeover like you suggested with, or the other place had done, or do you put it center, or is there any special technique of getting them onto that?
Again, there's no right or wrong really, because again, so many of these answers are really wishy-washy. I'm very sorry, but it's like I was saying, like all of your users, you know, they will interact with the site in different ways. So the thing that I would recommend doing is just making sure, if that is something that you really want to divert people towards, is make sure that it's in reach throughout the user journey at relevant points. So you know, often when you have a show, you can have recommended, you might also like, you know, get that element in there. You know, you've seen this show, you might also like to watch this one from home. Include it in the homepage. Yes, make it a focus of, like, if you have a scrolling banner or something like that, make it a focus in there. Change the content on key pages around, you know, what am I trying to say? Just different areas of the site. Make sure that area is in reach. There's no way to force people to click on it. The only thing to do is to make sure it's in reach, and, you know, create content around it that makes it look exciting. Don't just put a button that says watch this on demand. Make sure that there is context about what people are watching before they go and click on it. So if you are going to add it to the homepage, yeah, like share some images from what they're going to be watching, maybe a clip in a video that they can preview. Make it as engaging as possible, and make sure that call to action is within reach in as many places as possible.
Yeah. So for instance, maybe make something like a small trailer that's like 30 seconds long that starts playing automatically, and then it leads on to an on-demand, the link to an on-demand video could be an option as well.
Potentially, yeah, potentially. But yeah, you know, like if what you want is to, if someone had asked me, you know, how can I encourage more, you know, newsletter signups, for example, I might have actually said, if we hadn't had the pop-up like question already, you could try a pop-up. You know what I mean? It's all about making sure these tools are just in reach for people, essentially.
Brilliant. We've got a question that sort of links back to our Hotjar, but how much should we look at tools like Hotjar screen recording to inform UX? I suppose we've already answered that needs to be looked into to sort of help them ascertain what's working and what's not working on their pages.
Yeah, they can give you really useful information, but there is also nothing wrong with just going based on your instincts of what you would want to see as a user, because, you know, often in organizations like, you know, like arts and culture organizations, a lot of the people I meet who work at them are often a big part of what the target audience might be anyway. So you can trust your own intuition on how you think something should work. If it turns out to be wrong, you can change it. I think you can over rely on data, because it's, you know, it's very important to use that data, but it can sort of make things a little bit too potentially formulaic, and you can miss people out from that by focusing on what the majority says. Just because not as many users use something in that way doesn't mean that you shouldn't also accommodate them. So yeah, I would say maybe, you know, it's worth something that it's worth auditing and having a look at once every 6 months to a year, you know, at the least. Maybe soon, maybe more, maybe less, depends on what you've got time to do, to be honest.
And just to follow up on, Lindsay's asked, can anyone use Wave?
Sorry, yes, yeah, it's a browser plugin for Google Chrome. If you search for, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but if you search like Wave Accessibility Chrome plugin, you'll find it. You can add it to your browser. It takes a little bit of getting used to figure out exactly what the alerts mean, but if something's red, it's bad, essentially.
Yes. Red is dead. It's okay. Don't do it. Could you share any best practices for website UX on mobile devices? So
yeah, absolutely. I guess, yeah, a lot of the things we looked at are were desktop based, and as I said, a lot of users for sites like these will be on mobile. Essentially, like responsive web design is just expected now. A lot of agencies still sell on it, like, oh, we'll make it responsive. You should just be making it responsive, really. One thing to the main thing that I think people forget on mobile is that things don't have hover states. So, you know, you can't hover on mobile like you can hover with a mouse. So make sure that you don't rely too much on hover states to present information to people, because otherwise they won't see it. Make sure you pay special attention to your menu on mobile. A lot of times in builds, the like horizontal nav menu will just collapse, whereas best practice is probably to create a separate mobile menu that is optimized for mobile. It does mean you have to update 2 menus, but it's kind of a small price to pay to make sure that the menu on mobile isn't too unwieldy. There's nothing wrong with having different like menus that present different information to mobile and desktop users because it's tailored for like what they're trying to use. And basically, again, like going back to the text size conversation, make sure that things aren't too small on mobile because they're smaller screens. But that said, people, you know, it's easier to zoom in on mobile to look at things that you want to. So essentially the principles are the same for user experience. It's all about content. It's all about making sure that it's easy to get to things that you want to. So ensuring that the device doesn't add barriers to that you're not relying on like too much that needs to be seen on a big screen. And also like page load is a key thing. That's a big part of user experience. People do get fed up and go away, and page load on desktop is always faster than it will be on mobile. So key pages that, you know, people use a lot on mobile, like booking, don't overload them with videos, don't overload them with interactive animations. Don't be afraid to turn some of your fancier UI elements off entirely from mobile. Doesn't necessarily need animation. People aren't looking to be wowed quite so much on mobile. They're looking for specific information. So put that information like front and center rather than a bit more of the spectacle that you might use when someone's coming to you on desktop.
Definitely. Good idea. Good idea. Right. This one here, I imagine is for some organization that has different shows that they put on, but is there any advice on how to approach the user journey when you have a key customer group that is at odds with another? So for example, how effectively could you put forward a children's offering in an otherwise adult focused venue?
That's a really good question. I suppose it comes back to search first and foremost. So make sure that like youth offering is really like highly optimized for search. So search users who might not know your venue, you know, well, they're obviously not going to know your venue for child performances. They can find your venue when they're searching for those performances. Again, paid ads are a good way to target people towards that. At the same time, I mean, a lot of theatres have these disparate user groups that are completely at odds with each other. You know, you have like evening classes for senior people who would be absolutely flabbergasted by the comedian that you're showing the next evening, sort of thing. And making sure that there's on the homepage that you don't push any too strongly, but also too weakly. That again, very wish-wash. It is a very delicate balancing act, essentially. And I suppose I think you can overthink it. I wouldn't worry. I think people are often worried that users will be put off a little bit more easily than they are. You know, if the content is right and the event is right, people will understand that maybe this is something different for this venue and they're trying something new, and that's a good thing, you know. And people might be more likely to engage with that, because if they engage with it, you'll be able to do more of it. So I would say, you know, maybe don't do the whole website homepage takeover for
like
the kids'
into like the Teletubbies.
Yeah, exactly, because that's going to put off users. But do make sure that it is prominent, and you could potentially use some slightly different branding elements to introduce it, like create like a sub brand almost for it. Use slightly different colors and styles to sort of say, this is something different, this is separate to what we're doing, but it's still part of our organization and it's a new thing that we're creating in that way. Hopefully that answers the question.
It's all good experiments that people can do. Really good question. Have you ever used website stats to create personas rather than a survey? I should imagine people have got a lot of data on the sort of like the visitors and sort of where they're from and so on and so forth, and they haven't got much in the way of survey results to get started on creating a persona. So is that possible? Could you use these web stats to create personas rather than surveys?
Yeah, I mean, when we do create personas, we gather information. Like when we do it here, we gather information from a few different sources. So we will look at Google Analytics and see what information it's giving us about demographics of people using the website, if the website does indeed have Google Analytics. And we will also, you know, we have written surveys in the past. But the main thing I generally find useful is I find that people who work in these organizations generally know their audiences better than any data tool will. So the most important understanding of audience for me comes out of conversations with the people who are interacting with them on a day-to-day basis and understand like the needs that they have. But I think it is important to pull that information from as many sources as possible. But there's nothing wrong with only using one source and making assumptions about people. If your assumptions are wrong, you know, once they've been shown to be wrong, just make sure that you're adaptable and that you change what you're doing to match the information that you have been given by the actual experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, Becky, straight after that, came up with a similar sort of question, which is, what's the best way to approach creating audience profiles if you don't have any data to use? So it really is go with your gut instinct, maybe to start with, because you know your audience better than many people out there. You see the people that turn up, walk through the doors, and so on and so forth, and probably sort of build a profile out of that. And then any data that you can find, whether it's social media or website analytics, you can sort of like help inform whether you've got it right. And it's not one
I think
size fits all, is it? You know, you can come back to it and change it in time.
I think so, absolutely. And the one thing I would say about user personas is they should always help. They should never hinder you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're struggling to create user personas and you worry, it's making you worry that you don't know how to target your content because you don't know who your users are. Don't worry about it. You know what I mean? Don't worry about it. They should always they should always help. They shouldn't hinder. It shouldn't be something like, we don't know exactly who our user is, so we're not going to do something. Do it and see how your users interact with it, and you will develop that knowledge by creating that content and seeing how it's used, essentially.
Right, moving on to, we've got a few more questions left, so I've got about 4 minutes left, so I'm going to try and
I'll try to ramble.
Do you feel that takeover pages are effective, and do you think they work?
Don't know, really. Honestly, honest answer, not a clue. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. You would have to look at your conversion tracking analytics to see whether people are actually engaging in the way that you want them to. Like I said, it's important when you're doing these to still cater for users who don't want this entire takeover. I think that's the main thing. But honestly, I don't have an answer for that. You'd have to try it and see if it works. Yeah. I think, like I said, a good user experience, a good user interface should be consistent. So as long as like a takeover isn't completely changing the way that your UI works and confuses users who have come and know how to get to where they want, then there should be nothing wrong with doing them. If it takes over to the point that it changes core elements of how your UI is working, I would say you're probably not going to have success out of them, because people who don't want to go to that specific show are going to be lost and not know what they're looking for, and might just abandon entirely. So it's all about how much of a takeover you let that takeover be, really.
Right. This next question, I'm probably going to mess right up, but does a page always need a CTA? We have lots of community projects, for example, arts and wellbeing, where PPTS are referred by their GP. So there is not necessarily an ask to sign up. I'd like to show what we do as a charity, but realize they aren't always as engaging as ticket sales pages.
Yeah, I don't think every page necessarily needs a CTA. What I would say is the main thing to do is just make sure that page isn't a dead end. So you don't, if there's nothing for someone to do, no form to fill out, no interaction to make sure that they can go somewhere else without having to hit back or without going to the menu. Make sure that there are related similar pages. You know, you might also like, this might also interest you, even if it just takes you to information about the organization. Once they've learned that, because they might have landed on that page from Google, they might have had it bookmarked. You know, as long as it's not a dead end, it doesn't necessarily need a specific targeted CTA, I would say.
Cool. You're going to love this last question. This is perfect, right? Is it possible to book a one-to-one to review our website with Ren and ask about the split pixel services?
Sure, absolutely. You are more than welcome. Oh, okay. That's very kind of you, and I'd be happy to do that. And I think if I scroll through, there's my details. If you would like to drop me an email, you are absolutely more than welcome to.
Yeah, so I'll leave that on the screen for a little while later. But that's all of the questions. It's been absolutely fantastic. So well so many questions. So many people stayed for the end as well. You know, yeah, brilliant. Uh, yeah, so lots of people are thanking you, Ren, for your time. I'd like to thank you as well. It's been absolutely fantastic. For those of you who may have missed some of it, the recording will be available on our YouTube channel, the Digital Culture Network YouTube channel. So that'll be in about 7 days' time, within 7 days or so. A lot of the things that we speak about, there'll be links to those resources as well. So yeah, if you need to get in touch with us, now I'm gonna have to take the screen. Hold on a second. We've got.
Oh, sorry. Do I need to stop sharing?
Nah, so I'm just gonna jump in and just.
There we go.
There you go. So if you need to get in touch, digital network at artscouncil.org.uk. Lots of people clapping you and applauding you. We've got the YouTube channel. And if you need to get in touch with any help for your organisation, these are the ways to get in touch. So we are bang on time. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. They're remarkable, really. Thank you so much for all your help. Maria, thank you so much for doing all your wonderful closed captions. It really,
Yeah, thanks, Maria.
Yeah, really, really appreciate it. I didn't introduce you at the beginning, which is terrible of me, but thank you so much. I know.
No problem.
One job.
Well, one job, I know. But thank you everyone for joining us.
Maria's been doing captioning for everybody. So if you've been watching the captioning, say thank you to Maria.
Yeah, because it's quite tech heavy. So yeah, we'll catch you again with another webinar sometime soon. If you check out our email marketing list, you'll see what's coming up in the future, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. So thank you very much for joining us. And yeah, take care. Have a great day, everyone.